Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 5th, 2022. Well, you could sit back and sigh and say, what a world we have, and where do we stand in what seems to be a growing element of chaos surrounding everything going on. We have the war continuing in Ukraine with an escalation likely. Europe is threatened with a cold, dark winter. Whatever happened to global warming? And starvation is leading to increased death rates around the globe, including in Somalia, also in Afghanistan, and in many other nations, in many cases as a result directly of sanctions imposed by Western governments. Meanwhile, Western media pundits are hyperventilating with excitement over each square kilometer of territory in Ukraine recaptured by Ukrainian forces, who are actually NATO forces using Ukraine as the foot soldiers. But at the same time, they're warning breathlessly of the likelihood that Vladimir Putin will use nuclear weapons with absolutely no evidence to back that up. Now, in the midst of this overall doom and gloom that we're presented with virtually daily in the media, there's a completely different vision of what's happening in the world that's you're prevented from seeing. It's about a future that's emerging that is somewhat parallel to the fight being waged by the Schiller Institute for the establishment of a new security and financial architecture to replace the bankrupt neoliberal order, which is being protected by the arms of the United States and NATO, by the war hawks, who insist there's only one model that can be applied. I want to quote from our daily briefing to give you just a quick sense of what this alternate vision is. This is from our daily briefing, which is available to you by subscription. Quote, where the blinkered slaves of the Anglo-American NATO world order see only the imagined projections of their own purposeless pursuit of power, those living in a new paradigm see a community of sovereign nation states, each committed to the actual well-being of its citizens and of the world community, recognizing that through peace comes security, and through the improvement of others comes lasting happiness. Again, that's from our daily alert, our daily update, which is available to you if you're interested. Now, one reflection of this reality is an opinion piece that was published in Newsweek, written by two former diplomats under the title, quote, nearly 90% of the world isn't following us on Ukraine, unquote. This is by David Rundell and Michael Gefoller, and it's lamenting the fact that many of our former allies and non-aligned nations are now moving toward the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS being the alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And that this is a policy toward development, especially infrastructure development, and away from the dollar-based neo-colonial policies of the so-called rules-based order. They complain that the higher U.S. interest rates and sanctions are leading nations to reevaluate their decision to stick with the dollar system. Now, this is important to note because this is a dramatic shift underway, which was called by Putin and completely a transition to a new economy and a new order which is a rejection of Blinken's and the City of London and Wall Street's collapsing financial system. Now, as we approach the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, in this context, there are two urgent lessons we can draw from that which are applicable today. The first is John F. Kennedy's decision to confront the Soviets that was based on photos taken by a spy plane which confirmed the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. Kennedy's decision was based on an assessment which was not substantially different from that behind President Putin's decision to launch the special military operations in Ukraine in February 2022. And this is made clear by looking at his October 22nd, 1962 address to the nation, in which he outlined the steps that the U.S. would take, including setting up a quarantine or a blockade of Cuba, which could have led to nuclear war. Kennedy said the swift and extraordinary buildup of communist missiles in an area well known to have special and historical relationship to the United States and the nations of the Western Hemisphere, in violation of Soviet assurances and in defiance of American and hemispheric policy, is a deliberately provocative and unjustified change in the status quo, which cannot be accepted by this country if our courage and commitments are ever to be trusted again by either friend or foe. And in a later statement, he said not only could not be accepted by this country, but by any other country that is the encroachment of the borders with offensive weapons that represent a threat to that country. That was why Kennedy said he took us to the brink of nuclear war with the Soviets. But at the same time, you had a serious engagement of diplomacy underway, directly involving President Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy. There were exchanges of letters between Kennedy and Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, which included a discussion of how to avoid an escalation. But as they were writing to each other, there were back channels in operation of American diplomats, including Robert Kennedy, with Soviet diplomats. And this opened the way for a peaceful negotiated settlement. Now, keep in mind, there were negotiations underway between Russia and Ukraine in March and April that were yielding some promise, but were shut down when Zelensky was ordered by NATO, in the person in particular of Boris Johnson, to drop the negotiations and instead accept the weapons from NATO to continue the war. Now, the only impediment, even to this day, to a negotiated settlement is the stubborn insistence of Western leaders that there's only one model which is acceptable, the so-called rules-based order, our way or the highway. We are the sole superpower and we can dictate what nations can do. In fact, one of the diktats is that nations give up their sovereignty. They surrender their sovereignty if they wish to be accepted in the club. Well, that model is collapsing. And it's not due to what Putin is doing, but because it goes against natural law. All you have to do is look at the crisis in Europe, or better yet, look at what's happening in the United Kingdom, where the Tory party is having their convention today after the Prime Minister, Truss, had to back away from her tax cut plan and is now under enormous pressure because her economic policies are destroying the pound and threatening the existence of whole sections of the population of the United Kingdom. And what caused this? Putin? No. The Thatcherite economic policies, which Truss has embraced fully, along with her finance minister, Kwarteng. Now, that model is collapsing. Now, let me give you another example of the stubborn clinging to an insane outlook, which is threatening the planet, which is the Green New Deal, which is based on the argument that human activity is causing climate change. The Green New Deal is advocating a destruction of modern science and infrastructure and imposing a negative growth model in the name of net zero carbon emissions, which will do nothing to stop so-called global warming, but which will threaten the lives of hundreds of millions of people in the developing sector, and at the same time threaten the lives of people in the so-called advanced sector, which is showing that it's not that advanced after all. Here's something to ponder. Scientists from Japan, the United States, and the United Kingdom presented a study at the just concluded Europlanet Science Congress in Spain, and they noted that a heat wave is sweeping across Jupiter. extending southwest from the planet's north pole. It's moving quickly. It's an extremely large heat wave with temperatures of 700 degrees Celsius or 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. The studies they reported show that there's also heating on other planets, Neptune and Saturn in particular, that are not directly caused by solar radiation, and certainly not by human industrialization and problems of too much carbon in the atmosphere. Now, such discoveries devastate the fake science behind the man-made climate change argument. Will this matter to the radical green ideologues who are supporters not just of zero carbon emissions, but using that to reduce the world's population, to carry out a depopulation policy that was so near and dear to the heart of the departed Prince Philip and is the principal cause adopted by the new King of England, King Charles III. So will they change? Well, they're not going to change. We have to change the policies. I would urge people to check out the upcoming events that are listed in the description section at the bottom of the update, which are a series of events that we're holding that you can participate in to raise the whole question of, will the population move away from this rules-based order before it kills us? The first one will be tomorrow, October 6th, at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It will be a press availability which will include people who have been put on a hit list by NATO and the Ukrainian government's Committee to Combat Disinformation. So you can sign up for that. You can participate in it along with the other events. So I would urge you to do that, to break the attempt to censor freedom of speech so that we can actually continue this dialogue, which I personally think is so important to moving into this new vision of freedom, which is now the potential for all mankind. Thanks for joining me. See you tomorrow.